Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, an extremely intriguing storyline for this Nebraska Cornhuskers program as they're going to add former German standout David Hofkin to this 2024 class, expected to get on campus in Lincoln over the next couple of weeks. And why I want to talk about this, really two things. One, I just think this is a really cool story, but I think more importantly, this just represents exactly how Matt Rhule wants to build this roster for this Nebraska program. Matt Rhule's a traits guy. He wants the guys with the elite physical and athletic traits that might not necessarily be the most polished football players yet. Get them on campus. If they have the stuff you can't teach, we'll teach them how to play good football. And you've seen Matt Rhule implement this strategy during his time at Temple, during his time at Baylor, and he's doing the exact same thing for this Nebraska program. We broke down that whole 2024 class. It's filled with guys that in some instances haven't played a ton of football during their high school careers, but have next level athletic traits. Those are the guys that Matt Rhule wants to fill this Nebraska roster with. It's a developmental system that Matt Rhule has. David Hofkin fits exactly what Nebraska wants to do to a T. Want to get into David Hofkin, talk about where he fits in this Nebraska roster. Before we do, and as always, just want to give a massive shout out to the Nebraska fans. Many of you guys know we break down every single Nebraska commitment. And the reason why is, one, I love talking the recruiting trail, but more importantly, the Nebraska fans, you guys continue to just show a ton of love, a ton of support to the boys. Can't thank y'all enough. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. It's going to be a very busy next couple of weeks and months for Nebraska on the recruiting trail. And without further ado, let's get into David Hofkin, and let's start with just a little bit of a background and how this kind of played out over the last couple of weeks. Sean Callahan of On3, I'm sure many Nebraska fans have read his work. He's done a phenomenal job kind of outlining this story. David Hofkin, right, grew up in Germany. He's a 22-year-old prospect that had offers coming out in the 2020 cycle, couldn't get over to America with the visa. Now that that's all sorted out, he's back playing football. And 22 years old, this is a guy 6'7", 260 pounds, a 6'11" wingspan, a ton of length in his arms, jumps a 9'4" in the broad jump. You're just talking about a special athlete for someone of that size. And I think Matt Rhule looks at a guy like David Hofkin and say, hey, give us 2 to 3 years building this guy in the weight room, building him out on the practice field. You could be looking at an extremely high upside football player for Nebraska. Now, the second conversation that you have to have is, what position is David Hofkin going to play? Now, you look at David Hofkin and say, at first, he was kind of sought after as an edge rusher because of the length and athleticism that he has. Those traits also translate to the offensive tackle spot. And you've seen film from him playing both sides of the football, primarily on the defensive line. It's very exciting, right? And you take a look at some of the film in Germany. I took a look back at some of the German film from a couple of years ago. There's a lot to be excited about David Hofkin, right? And he needs to fill out the frame. You even go back and they'll kind of outline what you're looking at with David Hofkin. 260 pounds, 6'8", a 6'11" wingspan, massive hands. Again, checking all those boxes that NFL and college programs are looking for from NFL draft kind of guys or high school recruits. And then you look on the film and say, kind of a twitchy athlete for that size. He's got some big time power in his hands, knows how to use it, and just a fluid mover. And although he is relying on a lot of just raw athleticism and traits to be disruptive as this edge rusher, you can see why Nebraska wants to take a shot on this kid. When you teach him how to use his hands, use that length, this kid could be a very high upside football player for Nebraska in a couple of years. Now, a couple of things you want to talk about. One, you got to transform the body. He is awfully lean at 6'7", 260. And I think that will help once you get him into this Nebraska weight room, get him with the nutrition staff. He's got a frame at 6'8" that you could routinely put on 40, 50 pounds and get this kid up to 300 pounds. And I think you talk about what position is he going to play. I think there's some really intriguing film in terms of him being on the defensive line, because I think he is a really functional athlete with a lot of athleticism for that size. Look at him covering this kick. And this is a guy, again, 6'7", 6'8", 260 pounds, absolutely motoring down the field, working through contact, making the play. And I want to take you to what kind of, I think, stood out to Nebraska's coaching staff is during this satellite camp where you have some European prospects come over to America, work out into some of these coaches, really intriguing pass pro sets from a guy that hasn't played a lot of offensive tackle. You talk about the twitch off the line of scrimmage, the functional movement patterns. You take a look at this rep from David working at the tackle spot. Good power that he has in his hands. That's a very intriguing rep that I think a lot of Nebraska coaches looked at and said, hey, we can build with this kid, right? And obviously, you got to continue to put the weight on David Hofkin. If you get him to 6'7", 310, which again, with the frame that he has, I think is very doable for this Nebraska staff, you're looking at one of those special athletes that's that big. And when you have a guy that is that big, that long, and that functional, you're going to bet on those traits every single day. And again, it goes back to how Matt Rhule wants to build this roster. He wants to fill this roster up with guys like David Hofkin who have just tremendous upside, and they probably don't get on the field for maybe the first 2 years during their Nebraska career. If you have enough of these guys that you're betting on, some of them are going to develop to really special football players for Nebraska. We know that he is one of the best player developers that you see across the country. That's how he wants this program to run. David Hofkin, a guy that we're probably not going to talk about for another 12 months. We circle back to this time next year, going into fall camp. I wonder if we're talking about a guy that can give Nebraska some big time upside. And even at 22 years old, he has his full eligibility remaining. He has a redshirt year. So essentially could be 5 years with this program. You look at 2026, 2027, you could be having a 27-year-old or 25, 26-year-old starting an offensive tackle or potentially coming off the edge for this Nebraska program. I am extremely intrigued. We got a lot of Nebraska to talk on the recruiting trail for the next couple of weeks. Wanted to hop on, give you guys some of my thoughts on this one. Appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.